Poštovani gledalci, dobar dan i dobrodošli u specijalno izdanje emisije Granice Istoka iz Dohe, gdje pratimo 16. po redu Al Jazeera forum. Ovaj forum, koji je okupio više od 500 eminentnih učesnika, posvećen je ratu u Gazi, ali i obnovi Sirije. Krenimo sa Sirijom. Rat u Siriji trajao je punih 14 godina. Međunarodni ekonomski stručnjaci, ali i Ujedinjeni narodi procjenjuju kako će državi biti neophodno više decenija i nekoliko stotina milijardi dolara kako bi se država u potpunosti oporavila. Sada je pitanje ko će finansirati tu obnovu. Više detalja u grafici. Detaljnije o sigurnosti unutar nove Sirije, ali i o stranim akterima koji su dalje prisutni u toj zemlji, pojašnjava nam Omar Ashur, profesor vojnih i sigurnosnih studija na Doha institutu ovdje u Kataru. Professor Omar Ashur, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, with the collapse of Assad's regime in Damascus, how has Russia's influence in Syria changed, and what steps, in your view, is Moscow taking to maintain its foothold in a country which it considered a major ally until very recently?
The victory of the Syrian revolution and the defeat of Bashar al-Assad regime represents a strategic defeat for Russia in Syria. And a diminishing of its influence and ability to project power in the Mediterranean. Russia has invested significantly, providing air power and also intelligence support, special forces support to the Syrian regime since 2015. And by 2024, that regime was defeated. And Russia has left a significant damaging impact on cities such as Aleppo and others. All of that translated into, on one end, loss of generations of the Syrian people. On the other end, loss of investments that were used to pop up air bases like Hamimim Air Base, naval bases like the Tartus Air Base. So all these millions spent to project power in the south in the warm waters in the Mediterranean have been undermined and almost gone, not totally gone so far, but likely to be almost gone. They will find other alternatives, Libya being one of them, Libyan naval bases and Libyan air bases, but it's still a process, and they will have to repay the money again and invest again in another unstable environment.
Right. Now, critics argue that Russia's reliance on Assad was a strategic miscalculation. How would you respond to this, and what lessons do you think Moscow has learned from the collapse of such an alliance and of such an ally in the region?
One, it's an alliance of the like-minded, right? In a way, Assad, the Soviet Union had very strong relations with Syria since late 50s, early 60s. On the one end. On the other end, it's really a very repressive dictatorial regime, authoritarian regime that committed crimes against humanity against its own people. And in a way, Russia has a series of alliances with regimes that are in that category. So there was no surprise there. On the other end, the armed opposition was looking for, came as a part of the Arab Spring. That was opposition movements that wanted some form of change in the region. Some of them wanted democracy. Syrian, in large, armed opposition fitted in that direction at the beginning at least, and then things went in different directions. So the pro-change forces were supported by partly the West. So in a way, Russia found itself that this is a natural ally, like-minded, perhaps maybe anti-Western. What they miscalculated is the amount of corruption and repression and mismanagement and utter mediocrity in one, how to run the country, two, basically the capability of sustaining combat effectiveness for a long time from that regime. Basically, the Syrian opposition, or not just the pro-change Syrian forces from the very far left to the very far right, has killed about over 100,000 from the Syrian regime forces, plus the casualties, plus the defectors. These are pro-Assad forces. Right. So already the regime was in very bad situation when the Russians interfered, and what helped them significantly was the intervention of militias funded by Iran. So you had the ground forces, irregulars funded by Iran, the air force from Russia, but that does not leave you much within the regime. And the lesson learned is if the regime is that far in the collapse process, then the likelihood of propping it up will require sustained presence, ground and air, and sustained intelligence, and change of leadership to have more competent leadership. So if this is what's needed, you cannot open another front in Ukraine and leave the front that is very fractured in the south. So if there are two quick lessons, choose your ally and don't open two fronts when you have a very mediocre and almost defeated ally in Syria.
Right. Now we know that Tehran has been very closely cooperating with the former Damascus regime for quite some time now. Now with the top brass of Hezbollah being completely decimated, Hamas also significantly weakened over the last couple of years or so. Would you say that Tehran is on its back foot, and how do you think this may impact its possible vying for influence in a future Syrian government?
In a way, Iran is suffering right now from an operational defeat, I would say. It's not a strategic defeat. Right. Why? It invested strategically in this idea. It was very successful idea in terms of projecting influence. You fund, train, give legitimacy, give some sort of guidance for a series of armed non-state forces that do not rule. So Hezbollah did not take over Lebanon officially, so they don't really rule, but in a way they have veto in the high powers, in the high politics of the country. So they have veto powers in security, in economics, in many other issues. And that was happening in Iraq. That model was happening in Lebanon. And also it was a similar model, although they actually took the state in this case and took the capital in Yemen. So what happened is that these organizations took significant hits, but the Revolutionary Guard is still okay. And most of the assets, it's not like the case of Russia, where the losses in Ukraine in terms of total casualties, meaning dead, wounded, defector, POWs, and missing, north of the 800,000. So Iran did not take that hit, that level of the hit. But it takes some significant degradation of non-state allies who were projecting Iran's power without a direct intervention from Iran in these places. So it's a hit to the strategy, and I'm saying it's an operational defeat because they will be able to probably rebuild and amend this after a certain period, or they will have to rethink strategy if the regime there maintains its stability and maintains its resources and its funding and its allies.
Right. And how does all this impact Ankara's view of the region and Ankara's interest in Damascus? We know that for many decades before, Syria was sort of a gateway for Turkish companies, Turkish cargo trucks passing on the way down to the Gulf and to other Arab countries. So it's quite a significant entry point for Turkish interests and investments.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, Syria is a loss for Russia. It's a win for Turkey. Yeah. And what you will see now is probably more and more cementing of the relationship between the Turkish government and the Syrian government, and also more and more establishment of these type of informal community links because of the number of Syrian communities and people living in Turkey and now coming back to Syria. So you're likely to see more and more solidifying of these relationships, which will have more and more strategic implications, whether on the security, defense, political, economic, and otherwise.
And there's also already been talk about possible defense pact between Turkey and Damascus. Do you think it would be in Ankar's interest to perhaps have a somewhat a permanent military presence in a new Syria?
It's a bit of a gamble here. Why? Because there are occupied Syrian territories by Israel. So you know, what would a defense agreement mean? If it means the stipulation of assisting Syria in the liberation of its land, then we're talking about a direct war between Turkey and Israel, which is less likely at the moment, at least. If we're talking about propping up meaning training, financing, helping structure, because now actually the Syrian armed forces will need a plan for force design. There's no force design at the moment. They will need a plan for force structuring, and then force equipping, and then force training, and so on. So the process for building up armed forces that we teach in the classroom, they need to actually do it and execute it in reality. And they will need likely a lot of Turkish help, because the others either are not competent enough, like the Turks, or are enemies, like the Iranians. So the choices is probably just
quite narrow, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, Professor Ashir, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
My pleasure always. Thank you.
Turska i Katar su dva veoma važna igrača u ovom dijelu Bliskog Istoka. Obje zemlje su duboko involvirane u obnovu Gaze, ali i Sirije. Nakon pada režima Bašara al-Asada znatno je oslabljena regionalna moć Teherana. Da li Iran i dalje želi utjecaj u novoj Siriji? O tome nam pojašnjava profesor Mehbuđ Zvijeri sa Katarskog univerziteta. Professor Zvijeri, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, I want to start by asking you, when you talk about Syria, you know, with the Assad regime now in the past, what are the priorities of a country that has been under a 50-year single-party, single-family rule?
I think there are three major priorities. Number one is security. Security. The country was falling apart, and you need to bring all elements of the country together, whether the population and the different, I would say, lands of Syria. That's number one. Number two is trying to fix the economic situation. People are living in nearly in poverty, suffering a lot. The price of the currency is very, very, very low, and this priority will bring more security and stability to the country. And number three is actually a recognition of the world of the new situation in Syria. That recognition will bring two things. One, removing of the sanctions, and number two, providing more support to the new, I would say, interim government. So those three priorities are major, and I think they are moving that, but it's very slow as well.
Exactly. We've heard of statements coming from a lot of different Western and international organizations and political leaders about the need for this new Syria to be much more inclusive. Now, how exactly do you build an inclusive country, an inclusive government, bearing in mind that significant portions of those were members of a defeated former regime?
You know, this debate reminds me of the, again, chicken argument. I mean, what's the priority? The different governments pressuring the new government that you need to be inclusive. But okay, how can I be inclusive when people are living in poverty, when there is no economy, when there is no stability? And when you ask them, can you help me to get the sanction removed, or trying to help me on building them the army, they said, okay, first of all, we need this. So this kind of debate goes on. However, I'm feeling in the recent weeks is changing. Europeans are thinking seriously of, I would say, removing some of the sanctions, financial sanctions. America is doing the same for 6 months. They already frozen some of the sanctions for 6 months. So this could help. This could help the government to be more inclusive. They already announced the committee which prepare for the national, I would say, conference. Conference which basically should be the first step toward more stable government. And it looks as an inclusive group of people who represent most of the Syrians. Let me just be frank on this. You know, it's hard to respond 100% to what people need. There are a lot of pressure from different countries. Every country has its own agenda. But I think the agenda should be a Syrian agenda, safe, stable, and also inclusive. And that is, so far, the new, I would say, government, people who are in power, according to their discourse, they believe in this.
Right. What lessons can the new Syrian government learn from the failed de-Baathification process of Iraq after the U.S. invasion and the toppling of Saddam Hussein?
Number one is building institution building. That's a priority. That's what will bring more stability and inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, you know, that the more you are inclusive, the more you are bringing people together. That's important. And the third one is avoiding the sub-identity, I call it. You know, you just deal people with Christian or Shia or Sunnah. You deal with people as a citizen of the country, regardless their ethnicity, religious background, or this. And if they follow that, it's likely to avoid the Iraqi situation. I would say in a good situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you see? We're talking about foreign influence in Syria. Do you see Russia is still wanting to prop up elements of the former regime and perhaps maintain a role for itself in a future Syria? And B, would you say that Iran is now on its back foot, bearing in mind that the former ally has been overthrown?
When it comes to Russia, it seems the government of Syria, they're already sending a clear message that they have no issue with Russia. I mean, last few days there was a phone call between Ahmed al-Shara and Putin, and just yesterday Russia sent a lot of Syrian currency because they have shortage of this, and they have not basically have a new currency. So it seems there is a negotiation goes on with in a positive way. I think that Syrian has an interest to avoid any problem relation with Russia. Russia, at the end of the day, is a permanent member in the Security Council. It has a basis there. As long as they are not intervening in their domestic politics, I don't think so the current government will have a problem. When it comes to Iran, Iran has lost economically, lost politically, lost in terms of security, and more importantly, the image of Iran. Iran has put investment in Syria in 45 years, around $95 billion. All of this gone overnight. Why? Because basically they invested in the wrong time with the wrong people. They ignored the Syrian people. Despite the fact that Iran has built itself based on a revolution against authoritarian regime, they did not believe that Syrians actually revolting against authoritarian regime and investing in authoritarian regime, and invested by paying more than $95 billion. They lost all of this. And the most important loss is the image. Now they lost in Syria, they lost Lebanon, Hezbollah has defeated, and then they are in real dilemma when it comes to the regional politics. It would need time so they can rebuild and wake up to the facts which are happening on the ground.
Let me just go back briefly to Russia. You say that the new government is somewhat open to coordinating and working with Moscow. Despite the fact that Moscow has been propping the Assad regime for quite some time, why is the new government taking a rather mild stance towards Moscow?
For two reasons. Number one, there is a discussion about the billion of money, Syrian money, which basically now in Russia. There's a discussion about basically this money to be back to Syria, and also Bashar al-Assad himself to be bring to the court in Syria.
Extradited, yes.
Let's not forget, his presence in Russia is a humanitarian presence. And according to the international law, he can easily be sent out, whether to the international court or to Syria. And by doing this, Russia is saving its face and its image by saying, and he becomes a card in its hand. In some stage, they will say, okay, take him and give us something else.
And finally, you say that now Iran is on its back foot. He has lost major allies in Lebanon, in elsewhere. Does this empower Turkey? And if so, to what extent?
No doubt, Turkey is winning a lot when it comes to Syria. Syria is the backyard of Turkey. Syria historically is the main gate to the Arab world, to Turkey, historically since the 16th century.
Right.
So Turkey is winning on the strategical level, on the defense level, on the economic level. And more importantly, the Akba party, which is now ruling Turkey, is winning, I would say, in a way that guarantee the party to win in the next elections. Because basically the refugees, the Syrian refugees are going back. All of the criticism because of the policy of Syria has gone, because I proved that the Turkish government was right, actually. And number three, there is a great economic opportunity for Turkish government, our investors, to go and invest in Syria. And those will play positively to the Akba party in Turkey.
All right, Professor, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom specijalnom izdanju emisije Granice Istoka iz Dohe. Cijelu emisiju možete pogledati na našem web portalu balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.